Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Excited to have you here with us today. My name is Steve Holzer. I'm the product evangelist for BIMobject, and today we have a special guest. I'm joined by a colleague of mine. Victor and I have worked together for the last couple of years here. I'm located today in our U.S. office in downtown Burbank, broadcast capital of the world, and it's actually sunny here today. Surprise, surprise. And I think, Victor, are you with us there? Viktor Davidov? I believe he's in our, well, another part of the world. He's actually in Sweden today. Victor, is that, how's things there?
Yeah, that's correct, Steve. Thanks for having me. Now it's dark, so it's 8 o'clock here, so I'm back home doing this webinar.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Victor. We got people filing in. Give everybody a couple more minutes to get seated and move to the front of the room here. Yeah, we still got quite a few. Looks like they're logging in, so we'll get it kicked off momentarily. Glad you guys are with us today. Victor's going to be sharing with us. I'll give you a little more introduction with Victor later on, but Victor has worked prior to joining us as a solution specialist in our AECO, meaning our content consumers area. Victor had worked for NCC in VDC, so it's great to have him here today. We have some a real-time example of virtual design and construction, or VDC, being utilized in a small way, but it's a very large company. So Victor picked out a great example because a lot of people ask, about getting started in a lot of these digitalizations. So anyway, hey, let's go ahead and get kicked off with our little housekeeping here before we bring Victor on. During today's discussion, there's a chat panel off on the right and a question panel. If you would, as we're going through the talk today, when Victor's in, I'll be monitoring those questions, and anything that you have that comes to mind as we're going through, by all means, put it in. And if we don't get to those questions today while we're on, we'll answer those via email after the fact. So, but don't hesitate to put anything in there as it comes to mind throughout the presentation this morning. As well, this is being recorded. It's a learning discussion that we record all these. I get a lot of emails from folks during registration. Steve, we're not going to be able to make it. I've got a meeting. I'm out of town. Whatever. That's not a problem. You'll get a link if you register, whether you attend or not. You will get a follow-up within a couple of days of today's webcast, and it'll have a link in it for to view that recording of this exact session. So don't despair. As well, you can share that link out with colleagues, friends, others that you think might be interested or able to absorb some of what we're doing, or be happy for you to share it anywhere that you like. So one thing we like to do on most of our webcasts here is understand who's with us, who's the audience. So let me kick off. We have a quick poll. Those of you that have been on before are familiar with this. We're trying to understand, the audience, you guys. Thanks for joining us today. Are you an architect, design? Are you an engineer? Are you in that early documentation phase? Are you a building product manufacturer? We have a lot of building product manufacturers. That's really what our portal is all about. So a lot of building product manufacturers are on these listening. What you need as architects, designers, engineers, also construction, trade, and assembly. In the past, the design phase, these were all separate silos, which I'm actually going to talk about in a few minutes. But we're seeing a much larger segment of our audience become the assembly phase, the construction managers, even trade contractors, and so forth, facility managers, facility operators. We also get on these now, as well as owners, because with the internet, one of the things, and this is the whole reason this series we've been running here since the 1st of July, is digital content as the currency of the full building life cycle, the 21st century building life cycle. That's the one thing that remains constant through that full building life cycle is digital content, and it's used by all segments of these of the audience today, and really everyone in the whole built environment. So good. Yeah, it looks like we've got pretty good response here. It's interesting how it's been shifting and changing. We're actually seeing more and more, a larger percentage of this construction, trade, and assembly, and this is spot on for today's topic. I'm going to close the poll in here. Let me share it out with you guys, and you folks can see exactly what it is that what I saw. So we still have a good share is the early design phase of this, but also really excited to see we got some facility owners. We see from our end in the digital world a lot more engagement with facility owners in product selection and purchase and demanding what they need for their facilities. So it's really become a much more holistic thing, which Victor's going to demonstrate for us or explain to us. So, but let me for 1 second here talk about VDC. It's the only to the degree that I'm going to explain what the acronym is. Since last week we had these buzzwords, acronyms, a whole list of them that was part of what our discussion was last time we were all together. Is this VDC, is that just another one of the buzzwords, another one of the acronyms? Well, it's a lot more than that. So it is a whole new language. We've talked about semantics and how critical semantics are when we're in a change environment. That's what we're doing. We're actually, all of us, everyone on this call today is in the midst of changing the world of the built environment. And sometimes we have to use these new terms in order to differentiate, what we did before versus how it's being done today. It's not just what we do. More importantly, it's how, which is really what Victor's going to be sharing with us a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things happening that require. So in VDC, today's topic, it's virtual design and construction. Virtual design and construction is a term that Victor will embellish a little bit, but it's another one of those acronyms that we use, and it's being used day in and day out. If I could encapsulate one of the best, I think, beyond what Victor will go into, holistic views, is we have different tools that are being used and leveraged in the VDC environment, certainly, but also even in smaller segments of virtualization.
Steve, before we continue, I still see the poll.
You still see the poll? Wow. Let me.
Maybe it's just me.
Thank you, Victor. Yeah. That's probably not just you. Look at that. There's a button that says hide. I'm still working on my reading skills. So anyway, hopefully now you can see the complete slide of the virtual design and construction that we have there. Anyway, thanks for bringing me up to speed on that, Victor. Virtual design and construction. I think I pretty much beat that one to death. So let's go on to today. Well, actually, this is yesterday. Why talk about VDC? This is what you see right now is kind of how, maybe a little tongue in cheek, but it's largely how this industry has operated for the last century and a half. Often a building, an owner requested requirements. If it's going to be a hotel, a hospital, a school, they would request a design and engineering to be done, and that would be completed, and it would be done in a silo, and then it was handed over from after that design phase, the construction documents, as they were called, the term back then, into a tendering and purchasing phases, then into construction and assembly. And the construction and assembly was actually, the field work. That's really where it had to be executed. So we have this term that we've talked and still use today called design intent. And it's a little bit of a nebulous term in that it's always open to someone's interpretation. Just like every time someone looks at a drawing, two people look at the same drawing, it's open to interpretation. That's what we're trying to get out of this with this digitalization. So we're into construction assembly. From there, that gets done. Everybody puts the pieces and parts together to what they believe was the design intent. Then it gets turned over to commissioning, and turned over to the owner as a building, a facility to operate. Now, in the graphic here, you'll see the concrete wall image. This came out of a team I was working with on a new ANSI standard for total cost ownership. It's all about digitalization. But anyway, Christian Cameron, who's a VP of facilities for Juilliard, a fairly prestigious university here in New York City. Christian, because I talk a lot about digitalization, digital content, he said, Steve, he said, how do we destroy essentially this concrete wall that has existed forever between that AEC phase of the construction into operations, building use, maintenance, and ongoing. So with that being said, we'll call this yesterday. This is how it was done yesterday. And I do realize it is still being done this way today in some cases, but we're moving. It's moving very quickly. So we're going to jump back here in this ongoing series. I've used this one graphic to bring us and center us each time. So we're continuing our digital content as currency series. And one of the keys is digital content is the currency of an unbroken information flow. It allows the information flow to remain constant of that digitalization. So today, though, the VDC portion we're going to be talking about in all phases and aspects of this is not necessarily part of it. It's mostly involved in the planning stage, the construction, the commissioning to turnover. That is where the VDC that Viktor will be sharing with us, that's really where it lives. And that's really today. This is what we're seeing, especially among serial owners. When we talk about serial owners, we're talking about large, they can be multinational, they can be national, grocery store chains, hotel chains, Hilton, Marriott. They're seeing this and demanding now this type of design development, this type of construction, this type of process to create the facilities they need. So without further ado, let's bring Viktor in. Viktor Davidov was the digital business developer and a VD strategist with NCC. NCC is one of the leading construction and property development companies in the Nordics. It has sales more than 57 billion, and it's got 16,500 employees. For those of you in North America, or relative to the SEC is about $5.9 billion annually that they're constructing and managing, and that's a pretty substantial entity by really any measure. So with that being said, Viktor has that hands-on, in-depth knowledge. He's going to share with us a good starting point, and this is a very succinct example that he's bringing us, but that's what we wanted to do, is give you something that really happened and relate to it as how it really occurs. So Viktor, welcome. Kick us off and let us know too when this actually happened.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that introduction. So before joining BIMobject, I was working at NCC, as Steve just told you. I was there for 7 years. That meaning that BIM was still in its beginning. We didn't even call it BIM back then. VDC as well as a working method. So just to summarize up what Steve was saying before. So VDC is a verb. BIM is a noun. That meaning that VDC is an action, that's something you do. BIM is a thing, that's something you can produce, touch on, feel. VDC is something you do. So that is a big difference. So VDC is not the next gen of BIM. VDC is how you work with BIM. So VDC more or less stands for has four different cornerstones. It's about collaboration, it's about processes, it's about metrics, and of course, it's about BIM. This meaning that VDC is about 75% people and 25% technology, BIM. So keep that in mind going forward.
Hey, Viktor, in this, could you expand a little bit? Maybe it's early in the conversation, but the collaboration portion, who's involved in that collaboration? Is it just an architect and an engineer? Who is typically involved? And if that's something that I'm spoiling for your later presentation, let's just say hold off. But I'm curious, who do you see as that?
We can take that now. So in the VDC process, the point is bringing all the stakeholders together in one room and doing design for a whole day. That's more or less the point. The client is there, the manufacturer is there, the architects, the construction engineer, the fire, I don't know what it's called in English, fire guy, everyone is there when that is needed. So not everyone is there always, everyone is there when needed. So that's more or less the point with the VDC and the collaboration and the processes, that you have everyone there contributing with their knowledge. The metrics part is about like tracking, for example, number of collision you have in the model each week. And when you have done 10 projects, you know if you are deviating from what's normal. When you have a clash detection in the second, third, fourth running of this collaboration part. So that is, and of course you have the BIM.
Right. So would you agree that in my earlier slide that we're kind of removing the silos and instead most everybody in those 4 silos we had talked about is sitting around the table looking for the best outcome for themselves and as well as the overall project? Is that fair?
Yeah, that is correct. It's just a big pool.
Excellent.
Where everybody's interacting. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, with that, let's go ahead and kick off your example.
Yeah. So before leaving NCC, joining BIMobject, I did a project together with a couple of colleagues here in Uppsala, where I live. We were constructing and designing a residential building for about 650 residentials. And I have always wondered what's the point of these drawings that we do that you see on the right hand side, or the schedules or the legends or whatever we want to call them. What's the point of them? I mean, why are we still using these drawings? And why are we mailing every action or question we have? I mean, the drawings, the sheets, the legends, they are only produced to calculate the price and for the suppliers to see if specs can be manufactured and delivered. And it's the contract. This is the way we work today. We need this paper. I wasn't keen on that one when we have BIM and we also work in a VDC environment. What's the point of doing this drawing, sending front and back, calculating price, see if we can manufacture these windows front and back? It takes a lot of time and it's of no use for the end client. That means this is just waste. So we were a couple of people in this project wanting to change this. I know that slides changing can be, yeah, thank you, Sid.
Yeah, a little delay across the pond, I think.
Yeah, so the goal with the project was to produce 0 sheet schedules, legends, drawings, and of course have the BIM model as the contract model, or having the BIM model as the contract. That was one of the goals. And also involving the manufacturer early in design phase. So one thing that we had that was a benefit in doing this with this project was that it was a turnkey project. So we, NCC, were in charge of the design, the procurement, and the construction. The supplier of the windows were already decided. It was not decided on a project level, it was decided on a company level, that this supplier is going to be used in as much, it's in all the residential buildings that we are designing and building. And the funny thing was that, of course, they had BIM objects of their products. So they have a digital copy, a digital twin of their products. And they had it on BIMobject as well. So this was the foundation when we started. This was the goal and this was the foundation. I know this could be hard for the public sector because you might not be able to involve the manufacturer early because you cannot specify them. I know this was not for the public sector, it was for the private sector. So you need to start somewhere. We did it with this project. Please change the slide, Steve. So what happened? Yeah, what you see on the right hand side is a screenshot from the BIM model, the actual BIM model. So the drawing you saw before with all the windows was from an older project, not this project, because we didn't produce any. We did produce 0 sheets, schedule, legends for Windows in this project. And the manufacturer were in 4 of these sessions where you design, collaborate. We call it ICE sessions. It stands for Integrated Concurrent Engineering. I encourage you all to Google that later. So ICE sessions. So they were there. They were there 4, I think it was 4 or 5 times, with the architects, with NCC, helping with design, finding the right products. They know Windows better than anyone. So they know when you need this type of lighting coming in, you cannot have this fireproof or sound rating. I'm not an expert on Windows, but it's a huge problem and a huge challenge. They know Windows. They were in the design phase helping and using their own products as a BIM object in the design. And the BIM model became the contract document, if we want to call it a document. The BIM model became the contract. What we are looking on now on the right-hand side is the contract. So time was spent finding solution, not creating and sending out sheets to different manufacturers to see if they can produce it front and back, front and back. No, time was spent on finding solutions instead. So we saved hundreds of man hours in this work. And the manufacturer knew 12 months beforehand almost every window that was being manufactured later on. Usually, if they are lucky, they know 12 weeks before. So it was more or less a win-win for NCC and for the manufacturer window. It was Nordon that you can find on our portal as well. But it was also a win for the architect. I don't know how it works in the US, but I'm guessing it's the same. An architect works by the hour. So they want to produce this kind of sheets, legends, drawings. So we had a big discussion about this before going forward. We said, instead of creating this sheets, you can focus on the design instead. And they were more or less happy because they didn't think it was funny or fun creating this legends, sheets, drawings. So it was a win-win-win for everyone involved in this project. You can change slide, please. Thank you. So to sum up, more or less, the success was thanks to VDC. We were working together, collaborating in that kind of environment. We used the digital objects from the manufacturers with the right geometry, with the right metadata, with the right information, and we know that these digital objects could be produced later on. So it was a really fast communication. So the hard part was not the technology, it was getting people to work in a new way. That was the biggest challenge doing this and going forward. Now, Nordon, the manufacturer of the windows, are trying to push this workflow into every project they work on. The same goes for NCC. This is the way they work. They started off with Windows, because if you can make this happen with Windows, you can make this happen with any product. So they are really going forward with this, and Nordon is also going forward with this. So it was a fun project, but the hard part was not the technology, it's there. The hard part was the new way of working. And that is more or less what VDC stands for. It's challenging our way of working and trying new things.
Viktor, so that was your example that you used with Nordon was a few years ago. How, and by the way, if any of you have seen the video or were at BIMobject Live last year, Nordon actually presented there, and they are on our platform, and they've even also are actually driving out of, not unlike what Viktor's just shared with us, they're driving their fabrication, their machinery, their shop, their floor, their manufacturing equipment right off of a lot of the actual models. So there's a video out there about that. It was presented last year at BIMobject Live, and is pretty remarkable how far, you know, some companies have moved in taking that digitalization and using it to drive their internal processes even. But what I was going to ask is if you could share a little bit about what you saw in that 5 years, you know, say to today, what you know about today with other folks you're working with other manufacturers on our platform. How has that VDC evolved from, say, just Windows? Where have you seen as the big areas that are really being benefiting, and how are building owners benefiting? You know, in what verticals of product? Is it just in mechanical? Is it just in facade? Are there certain areas? What's your feeling there?
No, you can say more or less that the VDC process helps people understand the whole project. With BIM, you see one picture, the true picture. You have the information, you have the visual graphics, so everybody understands. And one key thing is to have the client involved, so they know what they are getting, but also having the manufacturer of the different products. I don't know exactly which kind of products are being most used in this process. I don't. But as I said before, if you can do it on Windows, you can do it on everything. So if you are a product manufacturer, push this, that you need to be in the design if you can. I know it can be hard for public sector, but then don't focus on the public sector, focus on the private sector.
Excellent. Well, we did have some questions that we asked, you know, what you want to know about BDC before we presented. I think there's some good ones that came in. Let's switch to those. But one thing that came up earlier, and actually I see that Maggie Terry just asked this, what do you submit to cities for permits when it's a building model? We understand, you know, there's a lot of challenges, especially with municipalities, and this is a global challenge. It doesn't matter if you're in Sweden, if you're in UK, if you're in Minnesota or Canada, you know, municipalities and the challenges of brands and things like that. So anyway, what do you see happening there? Maggie Terry wants to know, to submit for permits to cities, has anything transitioned in this yet?
I'm sorry, I don't know what that means.
So right now in most areas of the world, to get a building approved by the fire safety or the building officials for code compliance, for egress compliance, that has to be submitted to a government agency for a building permit. How are those approvals submitted if they're in a model versus the plans, the physical sheets?
Yeah. Awesome question. That is, I know here in Sweden we are working very hard with that, the government making this happen, that you can use the BIM, the 3D model, when getting those permits. This is something that really needs a lot of work, and it's still an issue. But thanks God, we can still flatten things out and print them if we need to. But that's done either earlier or later. But I don't have really a good answer on that one, more than knowing that there are a lot of work doing in this area, especially in Sweden. I don't know how in the US.
Well, and I don't know if scary, another acronym, ICC. Those of you that are familiar with ICC, the International Code Council, started a project a number of years ago called Smart Codes, and it was taken over by a body at the University of Texas, Austin, called FIATEC, and they actually took that to 6 municipalities and did a complete proof of concept, functional proof of concept. You can find the term the study at the National Institute of Building Sciences here in the U.S. The title of the program was From 60 Days to 60 Seconds, where they were able to do a complete submittal of a facility and have plan check occur electronically. So there were no papers. Again, that was a proof of concept, but this was also, I believe, 6 years ago, and there's been evolution in that. That's still a big challenge, as Viktor pointed out, but it's only by having this content that one of the keys is the digital content. We have to have that, you know, contained and brought in, and it has to be real actionable content to be validated, to be able to be utilized in these types of processes. So BDC is something that brings that together, and brings the team together, not only to benefit the overall process, but also the only thing, it's a virtual design and construction. The only way you can virtualize something is have it digitalized. So that being the case, let's go ahead and kick off one of our questions here that we got got a little trigger happy. So Troy Crandall with the Smith Group said, which model is better suited for use in facilities management, the design intent model or the construction model? Victor, you want to fill us in on what you see there?
I would say none. But if you evaluate on that one, I would say the design intent model is just a design intent, and then the construction model is what you use in the construction. And it's with the VDC process, the point is having the design intent model transferring into being the construction model, which is then transferring into be the as-built model. And it's the as-built model that you use for facility management. So yeah, it's a development of the model at the same time as you develop the project.
Yeah, and this also ties in a lot with our last digital twin discussion here on this webcast series. We talked about the digital twin, and so again, if we look at the design intent model and the construction model, we're still in silo thinking. And Troy, thanks for your question. I'm not intending to say that that's not what's happening today. I understand that it is, but what we have to get to here is that the design intent model is the core, and it remains through that full building life cycle. It gets embellished, it gets modified, it gets updated with as-builts. There's a lot of places now that a lot of large projects that they're using drones daily for progress, for update, for even payment schedules and so forth. So that model actually gets embellished and grows with the project and becomes that turnover, which that's back to what we talked about. It's the continuum all the way through. We're not changing different models for different things. The same data store, the same common data environment that we've talked about all along in this series is getting embellished. It's getting richer, and it's getting more accurate, and it's getting the information that it needs. So VDC is where that really starts and is maintained. So we'll go on to next here. What would be the first step to introduce VDC to your construction team? Asked Michael Brimmer with Omicron. Victor, what do you say?
That was more or less what I did my whole time at NCC, doing this, introducing VDC to construction teams. So I would say that you first need to understand that VDC is a verb. That's something you do. It's not the technology. It's not the thing. It's an action. So if the team you are trying to introduce VDC to is not willing to change, are not willing to look for a new way of working, then don't bother. But if they are, I met a lot of people that weren't. I met a lot of people that were. So I focused on the people who were willing to change. So start identifying if they are willing to change, and start with the people, and then later add on the technology. So I mean, you can more or less do VDC without BIM, but that's missing the 25%, and you need those 25% to be successful. So focus on the way of working, focus on the processes, focus on involving people, not just a designer, an engineer. You also involve the manufacturer, the client, and so forth. Think wider.
Excellent. Hey, I want to say, I realize we're 4 minutes over here. Again, we try to get the meat of the conversation to happen within the 30 minutes that we schedule, but we do go ahead and run some questions out as they are relevant. So those of you that need to get off, we understand that you will get that link within a couple of days and be able to review any of them that you're missing if you have to get on to another meeting or something else. Perfectly understandable. But we are going to stay on for a few more minutes, because not only do we have some of the pre-registration questions, a couple of those left, we've got a few great ones that have come in that I want to address as soon as we get through these pre-registrations. So if you got the time, hang with us. We'll keep having the chat. So with that being said, Victor, what should students focus most on when they start the job search? And we get a lot of students on these. That is who's coming into the workforce. They think differently. So in this day and age, what will be the most important skills for them to get? And Dixie Norman with the NAIT has asked us this.
Yeah, I think that you should be aware of that everything that can be digitalized will be digitalized. So all the repetitive work, don't focus on that one. I believe that focusing on transferring needs between a client to the computer and let the computer do all the calculation, all the design, all the work. If you can focus on understanding people needs and transfer that into a computer, that is the way you're going to make business later on. I'm very sure about that. So making people's wishes come true, I think that is something that you should search for when searching for a job. How can I work with that?
Great perspective. Thanks for that. Emil McCauley with TGWB Incorporated asked, how does somebody convince an owner of many aged buildings and currently operational buildings to incorporate BIM into a renovation?
Yeah, renovation is a very good place to start, because we all know that there is a lot of buildings out there that needs to be renovated, and just starting doing a BIM model from scratch for a renovation project is quite time consuming, and maybe some costs more than it gives. But I anyway think that to convince an owner, if you don't think there is a value knowing all your assets in your building, I don't think that it could be quite hard. But if you believe that there is a value knowing how the building is performing, how the assets are performing, knowing beforehand when something is about to break or when something needs to be maintained or replaced, then there is a huge value. So getting that knowledge out there, that knowing what you have and knowing how it operates and how it works, that is of a big value. So I encourage everyone that are doing renovation that do a small BIM model of that when you do design, when you do the construction.
Yeah, there's some other. This is a great question in from my perspective on the bridge. What are the bridges to get? Because it is one thing to start digital on a brand new building from the ground up and create and using VDC to create this digital. But how do we harvest existing facilities? Because they also are being updated or being renovated, and many owners see the value and they want to bring that into digitalization. But how do we do that? Well, there's a lot of way to harvest existing conditions through laser scanning. It's not ideal, maybe. Matterport scanning. It's also not ideal. There's a lot of them that aren't ideal, but they are a start, and they get you in that digital common data environment. Can be the seed for that. And then as that is redesigned and re-engineered, that becomes a platform for this digitalization to occur, to bring in digital parts, to bring in our digital content off the BIMobject platform and make that part of that model as it evolves. So I think we need to really look at these bridge things, as an industry, because certainly, 91% of the $10 trillion a year in the global built environment industry is spent after the building's complete, and owners are dealing with that. So that's a big area that they need to be able to manage. So anyway, we got a couple more here. How do we balance content this is a great one. We get this a lot. Travis Vaughn at Clayuba Wald asked, how do we balance the content that's nimble enough for the design construction phase while containing enough data, the metadata, the performance data, the sensor data for the facility management phase?
Yeah, I believe you can look at this from two perspectives. One thing, the softwares are getting better and better, computers getting faster and faster. So what is nimble enough? I don't know.
Right.
But if we look at today's current state, I think you should demand from the manufacturers producing the objects that they are nimble enough to use in the design phase, but also contains the metadata needed in the facility management. It doesn't just need to be metadata. It could be PDFs connected to the objects through BIMobject, telling the maintenance instruction for this door or this whatever it is. So you demanding that the manufacturer create objects that are easy to use, not too detailed, working in the design phase, but later on for the facility manager having that information. I think that's the current state. In the long run, I believe we should have super detailed objects containing all the information and all the parts as well. But that's maybe ahead.
And I agree with you on that, Victor. There's a couple of things that I'd like to embellish on this just a little bit. And one is back to our graphic that we've used through this series. In the center is that common data environment. So when we talk about nimble enough, it's because we're throwing a model, a building over the wall as a file. And once we get out of that practice, and this is happening now in many, especially back to the serial owners, that facility is actually established in a cloud environment that is then embellished throughout. So it becomes a lot less of a challenge to have all that metadata with that product. Also, BIMobject, the way we've addressed it at BIMobject is our property sets. Those of you that are familiar with our platform, that's our property sets allow, for instance, COBie data. That's not needed till turnover, much later in the process. And it can be any even proprietary data for a given manufacturer or other standards that can be added as a property set that is accessed and brought into the process at a later point in time when it's needed, when it's necessary, and not necessarily in the design phase. COBie data is not needed till turnover. You wouldn't even have all the information until the turnover. So these are the types of things that we're also seeing happen that we got to really rethink as why we use new terms. And VDC is one way we're rethinking it, of how we're managing this information versus how we used to for generations, if not centuries. Okay, the last of the pre-registrations. Any advice on running a successful VDC coordination meeting, post-design pre-construction for the general contractor and all his subs? I think you kind of answered this in that it's probably all the way, they're already collaborating from the beginning. But Christopher Rump at Associated Construction Engineering had this question. So can you clarify that one for us, Victor?
Yeah, I would say that this is something you do early. The post-design and pre-construct, I would say, the way we did all the coordination meetings was using the ICE, the ICE methodology, the integrated concurrent engineering methodology. So I would recommend Google that, see how that works. It took years for us when I worked at NCC to be good at it. But just to go back to before, when we did our first project with the VDC, and we started doing ICE sessions for these coordination meetings, these design meetings, we ended up doing this project 3 months earlier. We were done with the design. That was the first project. Yeah.
Yeah. And that time converts to dollars as well.
Yeah, of course. But it was quite weird being finished so fast. And yeah. So I would say I cannot really answer the question post-design and pre-construction for general contractors and all his subs. But when talking about coordination meetings, I would say look at the ICE methodology.
Yeah, that really changes this around, and we don't have that linear progression. One of the questions I wanted to address that Eduardo Lledo had asked online here a little bit ago. His question was, do you think that manufactured digital content that's more focused towards the construction process and not only the BIM content for design is one of the most important factors to the spread of VDC? I really want to hear what Victor has to say, but I would like to share, there is a VDC that I was contacted by a number of times. Actually, as a former, or not a former, the gentleman that reached out a number of times as an architect. He was working for a large contractor as a virtual design and construction coordinator up in Seattle area, and for one of the biggest aircraft manufacturing companies on the planet, they built their buildings. And the calls that I was getting is, Steve, can you reach out to some of the equipment manufacturers? We need specific brand specific tower cranes. We need specific material handling equipment, because they're actually doing the logistics, especially on a tight site in an urban area, or even in residential. How are they moving the material, and what's the timing of the delivery of the material, and what equipment are they using to move it? They're actually doing this in a virtualization pre even starting the job on the site. So they're saving days, they're saving maybe instead of 3 tower cranes, they go down to 2 because they were able to do tests and virtualizations on this. So Victor, do you have other, where that's more the construction process, do you see that happening as well in the VDC pieces?
I agree with you, Steve, on that one.
Okay. All right.
Before we continue, I had one from Karina saying she Googled
Yeah.
So integrated concurrent engineering. So if you search for integrated concurrent engineering, you will find more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have any more cool questions, Steve?
Yeah, I think there's a few other ones here that are kind of specific, so we'll get to you. Well, there's a great statement Jed August has just shared with us, and he's kind of recapping what we've been saying, that we all sit around a conference room table with all the consultants and key contractors and come up with the high-rise building concepts in days and record that session so that everyone can be shared. So that's really great to hear. I mean, this is truly this collaboration that Victor's talked about. It's having the stakeholders, the right people in the room, and often a lot of, that's why we have a lot of these RFIs and change orders much later in the process. The experts in the facade or the experts in the finished systems were never engaged until long after the contracts had been awarded often. So I think that's what we're doing. One article that I was actually I've been in the middle of writing is, we hear this all the time about, this new process or this new way of doing it, Steve, it takes so much more time. And I submit to you that it doesn't take any more time. It requires the time to be spent at a different phase of the process. And that's what Victor just explained to us. So a lot of that coordination is done, and he saved a lot of time because they brought the right people, the right content, the right information into the room. So with that, anything else that you had, Victor, that you wanted to add? I think we're pretty much ready to close this one out. We've already had the discussion items and questions. Make sure that you sign up on BIMobject.com, register yourself as a user on our platform, and you'll be included in all of the invites for any of our webcasts. We also have a weekly newsletter that lets you know about new products that have been added to the platform. We're adding just hundreds and thousands of items constantly onto the BIMobject platform, onto the cloud. So by you being a registered user of the platform, you will stay in that information loop. Our next webcast will be on September the 25th. Our BIMscript team, which is a tool that creates content that is able to be used, and they're going to present what's the big deal about BIMscript. Lawrence Slam and Peter Motte will be digging into that. On October 2nd, the next BIMobject Talks by Steve Holzer. You tell us, what do you have? We haven't been setting these up because we're getting so many good suggestions and so much feedback from you folks that are on these, that we're really trying to answer what your needs are, what you're seeing out there in the day-to-day, that we can help you navigate. So afterwards, when this closes out, there'll be a short survey in that it's 2 questions. One of the questions is, again, we're looking for those topics. What do you want to know? What can we help you understand more about? And what maybe are we missing? Happy to hear that too. So anyway, we sure appreciate all your feedback and input on that. So, and thanks for helping us. This is a team effort. It's not just Victor and I or BIMobject. It's all of you. It's what it takes to make this happen, to get building products into the hands of the people at the right time with the information, the digital content that they need to really be effective in this industry. So thank you, Victor, for your insight, for joining me today and sharing.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Everything about the VDC. And thank you all for joining us today. We'll close it out. That survey will be there, and you'll receive within a couple of days an email with the recording, and share that with your friends. Till next time, everybody, have a great week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.